to our virtual Builders Society. And I think this is going to be a really fun event. I'm sorry we have to do it virtually and not together, but we'll just have our cocktail and pretend that we're together. And there have been some amazing things going on at Better Housing Coalition during this very difficult COVID time. And we thought maybe we could share some good news with you and a really interesting story. And I know that's very welcome at this time. A couple of quick thank yous. I'd like to thank South State Bank, Bobby Cowgill, for sponsoring this event. And I, of course, have to call out our co-founder, my mother, Carter McDowell, with a hi mom. So, and not everybody gets to do that. So it's a privilege that I have. Tonight is the 12th anniversary of the Better Housing Coalition Builders Society, established in 2008, to recognize sustaining donors contributing at a significant level. And some of you joining us tonight have been members that whole time, and thank you. Some of you are here as new guests, and we're hoping that this event might pique your interest in the Builders Society. Consider this event as an invitation to join our society. Once a year, we make time to recognize you as important partners in our long-term success and to thank you for your unwavering support. On behalf of the staff, the board, and the roughly 2,000 people who call Better Housing Coalition communities home, we appreciate you. As I alluded to, we've been really busy this year despite the pandemic. Some of our best laid plans have been set aside, but some amazing accomplishments have occurred nonetheless. Let me share a quick update of some of those accomplishments that your support has helped make possible. I couldn't be prouder of this organization, and you should be too. First, you may already know that many of Better Housing Coalition's residents hold jobs in service sectors such as home health care, hospitality, retail, and food service, hard hit by the health pandemic. Realizing that no one can shelter safely in place without a shelter, BHC staff quickly pivoted to help stabilize and support those families most in need. I'm happy to report that we raised nearly $1 million over the summer for this effort. Funds that will provide rent assistance, jobs retraining, and education, and technology platforms to help residents access new opportunities. This is good for our families, our business, and our community. Next, I'd like to remind you that we recently held our first ever virtual ribbon cutting and a tour of Market Woods, which is our newest senior community in Chesterfield on the West Winchester Greens campus. Leasing for seniors in a virtual environment, while not without its challenges, is going well, and we expect to have all 60 units occupied by year end. Next, I want to, thanks to the commitment and support of a group of generous donors, I want to let you know that we will be establishing our first endowment to sustain higher education scholarships and resident programs by the end of this year. The scholarship endowment is in honor and memory of the late John McCann, a former board chair who was passionate about this program. The last little update for you, I'd like to comment that our real estate development pipeline is more robust and diverse than I can recall ever having seen it. And you'll be hearing more about some of these new developments soon. In fact, that's a very good segue for tonight's presentation on one of our upcoming communities with a very interesting historical past. So now let me pause and invite our sponsor, Bobby Cowgill, to make a few comments. Thank you, South State Bank, again.
Good evening, everyone. As we mentioned, my name is Bobby Cowgill, and I'm the president of the Virginia market for South State. And we just wanted to take a quick second to say how honored and what a privilege it is for us to be a part of this great event tonight and help support all the great work that Better Housing Coalition does. Like most of you, I can imagine you'd rather be in person tonight, and we would too. But I think we're in for a real treat, and the BHC team has done a great job in putting together a really great event, and we're all in for some really engaging conversation. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it. If we were in person, I would take a moment to introduce my two colleagues that are here on the call with us, and let them maybe say hello. But since we're on a virtual call, I thought I would at least mention both of them, since they've been instrumental in the support of BHC over the years. The first is Edward McKelvey. Edward is our Community Development Officer for Virginia, as well as other states across our 6-state footprint. And he's on the call tonight with us as well. And the second is Michael Williams, who I think might be a familiar face to many of you. Michael heads up our wealth management operations here in Richmond and was a former board member of Better Housing Coalition. So Edward and Michael, thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks for your support of BHC over the years. Like most of you on the phone and on the call today, I know corporate stewardship is really important to all of you, and it is to South State as well. I thought it would be fun to share a few photos here on the slideshow of our team in action around town doing what we enjoy best. And that's, being an integral part of our community and helping support wherever we can. So I'll stop there. I know there's a lot of exciting conversation ahead of us, but just wanted to take a moment to say thanks. We're honored to be a part of the event tonight and look forward to seeing you all in person soon. With that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Bobby. And we're on to the agenda now, and let me set it up really quickly. I'm really excited. We have a fascinating agenda tonight. We have 4 speakers. We have historian Elva Belsches. We have from Chesterfield County, Jane Baskervill. We have our awesome CEO, Greta Harris. And we're very lucky to have Burt Pinnock from Baskerville, our architect. And we're gonna have Elva cover the history of Green Book. Jane is gonna talk specifically about the history of the Colebrook Hotel. And Greta is gonna talk about the context of racial inequality in housing development. And then Burt is gonna talk specifically about our vision for the Colebrook community. So that's a heck of an awesome agenda, hoping to be done and allow 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A and get finished at 6:30 tonight. So thank you all for joining us. And now let me introduce our first speaker, Elva Belsches. And Elva is a Richmond area public historian, author, curator, and filmmaker who specializes in chronicling the African-American experience in history here in Central Virginia and beyond. She lectures locally and nationally on various aspects of their journeys. She's the author of the publication Black America series, Richmond, Virginia. She authored the narration and conducted the research for the documentary The Life and Times of Elizabeth Keckley in 2014, and was also honored to serve as the in-studio researcher on Steven Spielberg's motion picture Lincoln, which many of you recall was filmed here in Richmond. So with that set up, Elva, I'll hand it off to you. And Elva's on mute, so we need to unmute Elva.
Let's try that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, great. First of all, I am honored to be here, and without further ado, I'll get started. The Better Housing Coalition has purchased a parcel of land that's actually off of Route 1/301, a little bit past the intersection of Route 10, that is very historic for a number of reasons. But the one that we're addressing tonight is the fact that it was once the home of the Colbrook Motel, a Black-owned motel that was included in the Green Book. Next slide, please. All right, a little bit of background about the Green Book. Just what was it? Many of you may have heard a little bit about perhaps the Green Book as the movie, but it was a book that was born out of a need for safe travel, if you will. The Green Book was created by Victor Green in about 1936. Now, Mr. Green was a resident of New York, but he saw the need for a book that would include places that were safe, that would actually serve as a blueprint, if you will, or a map to address where people could go as far as safe places, people of color. Now, having said that, we can't speak about the Green Book and that it was founded not only in 1936, but it coincides with what is called the Great Migration, where you had as many as 6 million Blacks come up from the southern states to the northern states in the Midwest and the West. And as people became more mobile, if you will, with the advancement or the ability to acquire automobiles, people traveled from state to state and location to location, you know, for funerals, vacations, weddings, and so on. And so in those southern states where you had the Jim Crow laws, you weren't quite sure where you could go and be safe. And so the Green Book was first created in 1936 with just New York locales in mind, but it quickly grew to include places around the country, including Wyoming, where people could go to safe places. They were able to determine where they could go to eat and where they could go and be accepted even to buy gas. And so this was, again, born out of a need, if you will, and Mr. Green did that. Mr. Green was born in around 1892 in that area, and his wife, ironically, was from Richmond, Virginia. What we're going to see is that this book actually had a run, and it did have several monikers throughout the years, had a run from about 1936 until 1966 to 67. It was put out yearly. And without further ado, we'll go into the book a little bit more, highlighting some of the Central Virginia entries, if you will. And this is the copy, or I should say the book cover for the 1940 edition. Most of them later on were about 80 pages or so, but you can clearly see it didn't just include hotels and lodges and touring homes. You've got taverns, garages, nightclubs, and even beauty parlors and barbershops. It's important to know that when people were traveling, they were often afraid because they just weren't sure where they could go and be safe. So oftentimes you would have packed cars with grandmothers and parents and kids, and they traveled with food that was already cooked so they didn't have to stop. And some even traveled with gas cans that they filled up prior to the start of their journeys, just for safety purposes. Next one, please. All right, now I include this particular slide because it includes from 1938, Richmond, Virginia, and part of Petersburg. There's one place listed there in Petersburg in terms of a hotel, and that was the Walker House. But in Richmond, if you look on the right side, you're going to see Miller's, which later became the Eccleston Hotel. You'll see Slaughter's, which was considered to be one of the finest Black hotels in the entire South. You have tourist homes also, where people opened up their homes to rent rooms and that kind of thing. Now, one of the things I want to point out that you might not know by looking at the addresses is that the majority of these entries for Richmond were located in Jackson Ward. Jackson Ward is a historic district in Richmond, Virginia. And as of today, Jackson Ward is considered to be the largest National Historic Landmark District associated with African American history and culture in America, according to the Department of the Interior. If they say it, it must be so. So having said that, with these Jackson Ward entries that you see here, you see a lot of places on Lee Street and 2nd Street and that kind of thing. I want to point out that on this particular page, you even have a druggist or a pharmacist, and that was Williams Professional Pharmacy on 3rd Street. And I'll give you a little sidebar on that. I was blessed to interview Mr. Willie Williams at 101 years old back in 2001. He was a 1933 graduate of Howard University's College of Pharmacy. I'm also an MCV School of Pharmacy graduate. So these stories take you into very special places. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is one of the examples of the garages that were chronicled. Places just in case you had car trouble or you needed gas, these places were listed too throughout the US. Now, this book grew so much that it ultimately carried places in Bermuda, Canada, and even the Caribbean. But this place happens to be in Jackson Ward, and what's the Owens Auto Service. One thing that you will see early on in the Green Book is that you start to see garages and particularly service stations that were Esso service stations. And that's because Esso became one of the first businesses to actually allow Blacks to franchise stations. They later became Exxon. So if that comes up on Jeopardy, you'll impress Alex Trebek with knowing that. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and here we are with the Eccleston Hotel. It was located on the corner of 2nd and Lee Street, right in the heart of Jackson Ward, across from the famed Hippodrome Theater. So you had myriad celebrities and notables that lodged here, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, Nat King Cole, James Brown, baseball players like Roy Campanella, Duke Ellington, you name it. So they had a wonderful restaurant. It is now demolished, by the way, and they were on the map nationally. And as an aside, Neverett Eggleston Jr. Was actually at one point a vice president on the Nationwide Hotel Association's board of executive board, if you will. And so this particular hotel was very well known. And as an aside, they happened to be my neighbors when we were growing up, 1 block away. All right, next slide, please. All right, we are finally at the place of the hour, and that's the Colebrook Inn. This particular snippet or page comes from 1947, and the Colebrook Inn actually started in 1946. So this is likely its very first entry. As you can see on the left there, it talks about good food and comfortable cabins. At that time, you didn't have the brick buildings. You had several, probably 8 or 9 cabins at that time. And it gives you again the address, and that William Earl Brooks Sr. was the manager. As an aside, quickly, in talking about the beginning here, actually Mr. Brooks and Dr. Cortland Colson purchased the Colebrook Inn, or I should say started it together. And this allows us to talk about the fact that the role of education can't be understated, because Dr. Colson was on the faculty of Virginia State College at that time, and he went on to earn a doctorate at The Ohio State University. Now, he comes from a family, the Colsons, everyone, were a Black free family. Their freedom dated back to the 1700s. And as such, you can see throughout the generations how important education was. Dr. Colson's father, James, actually was one of the first 5 Black Phi Beta Kappa graduates. His dad graduated from Dartmouth in 1883. So it tells you the importance of education. And the Brooks also promoted that with young people. Dr. Baskerville will speak on that. The Colebrook Inn later became the Colbrook Motel, of course, and it was a hotbed for civil rights. And again, you had many notables. Dr. King, James Brown, and professional baseball players. But also I was able to uncover within the last 3 weeks that the Omega Psi Phi fraternity actually had what is called a smoker for none other than the gentleman that would become the first Black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. And so it's a powerful amount of history coming out of that Colebrook Inn. Next slide, please. All right, now this is my last slide because I wanted to show that the Colebrook was not just a motel on the side of the road where people stopped. It was nationally known. When it opened, it made national news, everyone. And I wanted to show you also that Mr. Brooks was not only the treasurer for a time of the Nationwide Motel Association, he was on the board of directors, or the executive board, if you will. So as a matter of fact, I uncovered that in 1 year during the 1960s, he was voted by the organization to be the Hotel Man of the Year. That's powerful because he was up against people from the Dunbar, people from New York, and people from Atlanta. And so he was a recognized leader nationally. Mr. Brooks is pictured here on the second row, second from the left. But also I want to point out on the first row, second from the left, is Ellis Marsalis. That last name may ring a bell because of the Marsalis family, who are great jazz musicians. But Ellis Marsalis Sr. Migrated from Mississippi, and in around 1936, he bought an abandoned chicken barn, as I understand it, and converted it into a 36-room hotel called the Marsalis Mansion. He also acquired a gas station, the first in his neighborhood. So again, this tells us, again, if I can't convey it boldly enough, that the Colebrook was on the national stage. And that's a very important thing to be mindful of. I know my time is almost up, but I like to go back to, you don't have to go back on the slides. I want to go back to Victor Green because he said something, or I should say he entered a quote that was both pragmatic, he was pragmatic and also prophetic, in that in the very first issue, as I understand it, he made the following quote: "There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal rights and privileges in the United States." And so he looked forward to that day, and that gives us the information as to why this ceased in, I should say publication ceased in after the 66-67 issue, if you will. He died in 1960. So I hope you've been inspired, and I hope you've been inspired to learn more, but I now will start to introduce Dr. Jane Baskervill. All right. Dr. Jane Baskervill is a lifelong educator, published author, and a Chesterfield County resident. Among her many accolades, Dr. Baskervill received the Virginia Tech Graduate School of Education Outstanding Student in Educational Leadership Award in 2008. This year, she received a Chesterfield County Public Schools Hall of Fame Award as an individual who has impacted student education in a meaningful way, and received a 2019 Chesterfield Education Foundation Bravo Award as an outstanding graduate of Chesterfield County Public Schools. Dr. Baskerville's nearly 50-year career in education includes teaching French and Spanish for Chesterfield County Public Schools and achieving a number of firsts: the county's first Black high school department chair, the first foreign language specialist, and first English as a second language specialist. After retiring from the public school system, Dr. Baskervill worked for the Virginia Department of Education for 14 years. African American history is an avocation for Dr. Baskervill, and she has worked for more than 25 years to document and publish information about notable African American businesses and residents of Chesterfield County, as well as the history of her church and her alma mater, George Washington Carver High School. Welcome, Dr. Baskervill.
Thank you, Mrs. Belsches. I am honored to be part of the FREDtalk today. I was really happy to hear all of the history that you shared with us about the national aspects of Colebrook Motel. I am also honored to be a part of the Colebrook Motel project partnership. Would you advance the slide? Yes. This slide shows you the interrelatedness of all of these groups that are working together toward advancing the Colebrook Motel project. First, you see the Chesterfield County icon, and that icon represents Ms. Kim Conley. She's the special assistant to the Board of Supervisors and Community Affairs for the county. That icon also includes the Chesterfield Historical Society, the Chesterfield Preservation Society, and of course, other Chesterfield County staff affiliated with the Colebrook Motel project partnership with Better Housing Coalition. And you see the Better Housing Coalition icon in the middle. Everything else is revolving around that icon. And we pay tribute to Better Housing, the Better Housing Coalition, in its efforts to develop affordable housing, attractive housing, and renovation and refurbishing along the Route 1 301 corridor. The icon to the bottom left represents community leadership in this partnership. That community leadership really goes along with Carver High School leadership, because Mrs. Brooks is an icon in reference to the Carver High community. Mrs. Brooks was an administrator there at Carver. She was a counselor there, and Carver High School was the only school for African Americans in Chesterfield County from 1948 to 1970. So the icon representing the community actually would be representative of students, teachers, and everyone associated with Carver. So that would take you to a national perspective, because the Carver High community has graduates all over the United States and beyond. The community group also is associated with the research in reference to the Colebrook Motel partnership, and also in reference to our trying to acquire a marker. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next slide, please. Here you see the beautiful Colebrook Motel with its renowned sign that people all over the internet talk about passing by the Colebrook Motel and seeing this sign. This sign will be refurbished and put at the development site. And Dr. Earl Brooks, who is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, has agreed to donate the refurbishing cost for the Colebrook Motel sign. The Colebrook Motel from 1946 to 1983 included an air-conditioned restaurant, a brick motel, and, as Mrs. Belsches has said, 6 log cabin cottages, and all of this was in motor court style. It served as a haven for Black travelers and a meeting place also, as Ms. Belsches has indicated, for civil rights activists. Located halfway between Richmond and Petersburg on Route 1, it was only one of several nearby accommodations. It was the only one, excuse me, of several nearby lodging accommodations that was listed in the Green Book. And I won't tell you any more about the Green Book because we had a nice, very nice explanation of the Green Book. And as also Mrs. Belsches has indicated, Mr. William E. Brooks was of national renown in reference to his affiliation with the Nationwide Hotel Association. And of course, his wife, Mrs. Audrey Brooks, was an icon in Chesterfield and all points beyond. There you see a picture of them together. And to the right, you will see Mr. Brooks inside the motel. And these images are courtesy of Dr. Earl Brooks of the William E. Brooks family. Next slide, please. Excuse me, I need you to go back to the last slide. Mrs. Brooks, while she was at Carver, was the sponsor of a teen group called the Delta Teens. Mrs. Brooks took it upon herself to mentor young people at Carver, and she organized this group and mentored the young ladies in the social graces. She also sponsored a group that was called the Velvetones. They did doo-wop type music and were renowned in the Chesterfield community and beyond. Mrs. Brooks is also known for serving as a lifeline to many of her students at Carver who might have fallen upon hard times and needed a lifeline. Some of these students she hired to work at the motel. She mentored them and they loved her. They loved her. And one of the gentlemen will tell you, one of the gentlemen who is a member of the Community Research Committee will tell you that had it not been for Mrs. Brooks, he would not be the gentleman that he is today. He would have dropped out of high school and not made it. Okay, the next slide, please. There are some, we talked about the fact that the Colebrook Motel was included in the Green Book. These two sites were not included in the Green Book, and they are located within a 2 to 3 mile range from Colebrook. What you're seeing on the screen at the left is the Dewdrop Inn and Sykes Antique Shop. At the bottom of the screen, you see the entire establishment. The Dewdrop Inn itself is to the right of Sykes Antique Shop. This was established in 1930 by Mr. William Sykes and his wife, Mrs. Ludesi Sykes, and it included lodging and dining facilities, along with the antique shop. After their demise, Mrs. Jeanette Sykes Copeland and her family took over the establishment. And by that time, it was only the antique shop that I remember that was left. This site was demolished between 1999 and 2000, according to the family members. And where the site, O'Charlie's Restaurant, is currently at this site. Okay, the Chesterfield Motel was another contemporary African-American establishment in the Chester area where Route 10 crosses Route 301. This establishment was approximately 2 miles north of Colebrook, as was the Sykes establishment. This establishment was built around the late 40s or 1950. It was owned and operated by James Briggs Friend and his wife, Mrs. Louise P. Friend. It also included a restaurant and lodging, and it was demolished, and at that site is the Home Depot. The Chesterfield Motel and the Sykes Antique Shop were within a couple of yards of each other. The next slide, please. We had mentioned that Mrs. Brooks really gave of her time, talents to the youngsters at Carver High School. This picture is of the Delta teens. I spoke of them earlier. It was a group of 20 young ladies whom she mentored in the social graces. And as a culmination activity, they had a Delta Teens debutante ball at the mosque that is today known as the Altria Theater. What's interesting about that is that this was during the times of separate but equal, and to have a debutante ball at the mosque was really a wow event. And this image is courtesy of Miss Ernestine Gregory Wilson, who is one of the debutantes pictured. She's actually the sixth person from the left, and she's a part of the community research group, and she's a part of the Colebrook Coalition group. Thank you. Next slide. I retrieved these news articles from the New Journal and Guide and the Afro-American. And it was interesting that the Delta Teens debutante balls were published in these publications. And I have found a lot of information pertaining to the Black history, African-American history, archived in the the New Journal and Guide and the Afro-American. The New Journal and Guide, much more so than the Afro-American, I'm sorry. Next slide, please.
Jane, okay. We got about another minute.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the picture before this, could you go back up one, please? That's the Delta Teens group of 1966. So they followed the first one. Okay, next slide. We are in the process of applying for a Virginia Department of Historic Resources historical marker. And I put the information about the Yancey House at the bottom right, because the Yancey House was a lodging place in Danville. And when I inquired with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources about whether or not it would be feasible for us to apply for a marker, she said, of course. Here's one that it was also a Green Book entry, and they have a marker. And the marker is similar to the one that you see at the top right, which was one that we acquired for George Washington Carver High School, of course, where Mrs. Brooks was an icon. The next slide, please. I wanted to say that the markers can only have 100 words in text. So therefore, Better Housing Coalition with the Colebrook Dialogue Group and the Community Research Group, our plan is to establish mini, M-I-N-I, markers around the Colebrook site. And these are just the credits, and the credits will close my part of the presentation. And I take this opportunity to introduce to you, and I'm sure this lady needs no introduction, but it's Miss Greta Harris, who is the CEO and president of Better Housing Coalition. Miss Harris, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, tonight. And thank you, Miss Elva and Miss Jane, for sharing this incredible history. We are super excited to be sharing with you our latest housing investment. And it's just so exciting. And one of the most crazy years on record. Many of America's disparities have been more fully revealed. Most of these inequities fall along racial lines, with so many policies, actions, and attitudes adversely impacting quality housing choices. So let me just share a few examples. On the policy front, there was redlining that devalued communities of color and prevented private investment, like in Richmond's neighborhoods in the East End, North Side, and South Side. There was urban renewal that targeted communities of color for demolition and a slow rebuilding process, like in the Richmond neighborhoods of Fulton and Randolph. There was the GI Bill that facilitated returning veterans from World War II with furthering their education and becoming homeowners, but Black veterans returning from World War II were denied those same benefits. On the action front, let me just share a couple of examples where the interstate system that targeted communities of color for highway locations, such as I-95 here in Richmond, that caused nearly 2,000 families and businesses to have to be moved in the Carver, Jackson Ward, and Navy Hill communities. The placement of public housing was almost exclusively in communities of color, and here in Richmond, they were placed primarily in the Churchill and North Side communities of Jackson Ward, and one investment in South Richmond. Building landfills, treatment plants, and other environmentally dangerous facilities were always placed near communities of color. And predatory lending that charged families of color higher mortgage interest rates with terrible terms, although those families qualified for traditional financial products. And like the Green Book indicated, not allowing people of color to utilize basic services like restaurants, gas stations, and motels across the South and actually across the country. Out of all of these three actions of policies, actions, and attitudes, attitudes are probably the most impactful in my mind. As part of America's rich and complex history, fundamentally, some whites saw people of color as being less valuable than themselves. Unfortunately, some of those attitudes still exist today. I believe that our BHC founders, Mary Tyler Cheek McClanahan and Carter McDowell, who's with us tonight, believe that every human being has value and that each of our lives is inexplicably interconnected to one another. They believe that living in a safe, quality, beautiful, affordable home creates the opportunity to dream of a brighter future and to accomplish becoming your best self. Simply put, we all do better when we all do better. It's an honor to do this work at BHC, and we are proud of what we have been able to accomplish together. However, there is much more work to be done, and we thank you for your partnership in ensuring that all of our neighbors have a good place to call home. We feel a great deal of responsibility to honor the legacy of this iconic property. The Colebrook Motel had a history of creating a place for safe haven, and we are pleased to reimagine that comforting gift to this community again. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Burt Pinnock, Chairman of Baskerville Architects, a fellow Hokie from Virginia Tech, a civic leader for social justice, a soulful designer, and most importantly, my buddy, Burt. Please join us and show our friends here tonight what we are imagining for the future of the Colebrook Hotel.
Well, thank you, Greta. I will do my best. Let's see. Oh, wrong. And this. There we go. Okay. Again, thank you for including me, and thank you for this incredible opportunity. I have to say, I think I have the privilege and the responsibility of living in very interesting times. I mean, I think that Miss Elva, Miss Jane, and Miss Greta have laid out sort of how interesting times have been, and certainly what they have become. Our charge as architects is always to listen to our clients, listen to Better Housing Coalition, listen to Greta and Lynn and John and the team about the goals and the aspirations for such a project, parse through the history and what a site wants to tell us, and try to discern out of whole cloth what it can become. A design approach is multifaceted, and I won't talk a whole lot about it, but I think it's important to say here that our approach to this is inspired by the purpose of the Green Book and the rich histories that are sort of woven within it. This is how we talk about home in this case. This is how we talk about it relative to that history. So finding accommodation was one of the greatest challenges faced by Black travelers, thus the creation of the Green Book. And I think you can almost draw a straight line to that challenge of people of color finding affordable housing. And so that's our point of jumping off. That's how we have come to think about this. And so understand that, you know, when we talk about our populations, we understand a little bit who they are. And so the goal here is to basically create and foster a vibrant and inclusive safe haven. You've heard that word over and over this evening. And so our interpretation of the Colebrook site will be just that. And this is how we'll talk about this community. Okay, I gotta get the hang of this before we're done. Every architect starts with understanding what the inspiration for the projects might be. And so trying to embrace, I will say, the vibrancy of the architecture of some of the native communities of our Black and Indigenous people of color is a little bit where we started. I'll tell you a little story here. I was presenting another project at the College of William and Mary, and it's a memorial to the enslaved. And there was a discussion about why the memorial didn't sort of look like maybe traditional figurative memorials, or didn't take its cues from the historic campus and the historic buildings of William and Mary. And I kind of thought to myself, I think that is not the right approach. If you are asking us to imagine the architecture and the physical space to serve a culture, I think we have to look a little bit beyond the architecture of the oppressor. I will just say it that way. And so that's been kind of a focus of the studio and how we approach design. But then there are elements that we know that work, that are part of vibrant, healthy residential communities. The front porch, absolutely. The idea of green space, parks and playgrounds, and then lessons learned in these last 6 months about things that have become even more important in the places that we live and work and play. Like this idea of a farmlet, the opportunity to actually cultivate and grow your own food. This idea of the ability to exercise, to find well-being within the places that we live has become even that much more important. So these are sort of the pieces that inspire us to create the architecture. And then the image at the top, I think, is one that just sort of resonated with what we thought we were trying to do. Inspired by the neighborhoods, for example, of my father's homeland of Jamaica. It's sort of vibrant and colorful, somewhat playful, a little bit irreverent. Inspired by the barrios of Hispanic people. And I think it was interesting, one of the members of the development team, when we presented this image, said it reminded her of contemporary Scandinavian architecture. And I thought, that's it, that is it, where each individual can walk up to this space and see themselves or their culture reflected in what we do. That's our goal. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the layout, and time is a little short. So the site here on 301, so when we laid this out, and I think we laid it out, and John, I see you here, and I'm gonna make you count. I think it was 12 times, maybe 14 times, before we kind of hit the right note. But the idea that the main entrance of what we will call Colebrook Street right now sets up almost a little bit of a traditional kind of layout, creating a space, a plan that is connected, for both cars and people, and that is recognizable in its sort of form. It was the goal here. And I think Greta on one call said, and forgive me for being blunt, Greta said, I hate cul-de-sacs. It's like, okay, I understand, but I think the physical constraints of our site almost dictated that we had to create something like a cul-de-sac, but what we ended up creating was actually the pocket. And I'm gonna call this whole sort of space the pocket of the community. It's going to become the heart of this space. So we got really excited about that. So here's just an aerial view. So these sort of vibrant, kinetic, undulating roof lines are what has driven the direction of what we want to do. And then in another way, I think if you asked a 6-year-old to draw a picture of a house, I mean, we almost know what they're going to draw, right? It's that sort of shape with a peak and a chimney and the smoke and the door and the window, and that's the house. And this idea of creating something that comfortable and recognizable together with something that is vibrant, I think is the right approach. So this view from 301, so talking about sort of the amenities a little bit. So as you enter the site, what you would first encounter is a small public plaza attached to a community center. And the idea of the community center is that space for any number of activities that might go on, but also that place for partnerships, for providing continuing education, health education, any number of activities. The outdoor space for, imagine if you will, again, the proverbial sort of little market, or the food truck day, or the carnival day, or any number of festival days that might be part of your own culture, as a place to sort of gather and celebrate that. As I sort of roll down Colebrook Street, so the buildings are massed into 2 multifamily housing units of sort of 3 and 4 stories as they sort of terrace down the site, and then 2-story walk-up units that sort of simulate townhomes in a way. So this is one of the multifamily buildings seen from the corner. And For example, we anchor the public space here on the corner because as you sort of roll down the hill, what you come to again is that heart, that pocket of the community. And so that space of overlooking this and all of these homes with their porches and balconies, so surrounding the yard and the park and the playground, so creating that vibrant space. I know I'm gonna get the cane in a minute. So that is the snapshot of this concept for the development of Colebrook. I think I like this, this sense of place. And I'm going to steal a little bit from one of the Green Book quotes. This space, good food and comfortable cabins. Can we do that? Can we make this a safe haven? I think we can. So I'm going to stop there and I think turn it back over to for Q&A.
Great job,
Burt. That was great. Thank you. So I wanted to take a moment and just let everyone know, if you're looking at the members of this presentation there, or the guests, Dr. Earl Brooks is in attendance tonight. And so I wanted to call your attention to that. He's waving, and his name says William Brooks there on it. And thank you, Dr. Brooks, for donating the refurbishment of the Colbrook Motel sign. And one of our first questions here is a great question. Elva, I think you'll be best to answer this. Where could people purchase the Green Book, and how did businesses get listed in the Green Book? Did businesses pay for the advertisements?
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
All right. There are several ways to get that included in the Green Book. It was one, self-reporting, but they also asked people to forward information that, in a secondary manner, if you know of a place that should be in here. So there are two different means. The Green Book was carried by some of the Black owned gas stations, and of course the lodges, but more so they were advertised and people knew about them by way of the Black newspapers also. You had the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender, and so they had special travel guide editions every now and again. So there are myriad ways, and it started out at around 25 cents. It may have ended up being $1.50, but they were carried by the businesses themselves and also promoted by the Black media.
Thank you. Greta, I think this next question might be for you. Hold on, I just lost it when we switched switch screens there. Who is the demographic for this community? Is it families, seniors? Will it be mixed income, low income? Give us a little idea of who this new community will serve.
Yep, so this new development will serve families with incomes anywhere from $25,000 to about $55,000 a year. So a range of incomes, and there are folks like the folks who work in restaurants, the folks who work in hospitality, people who are taking care of our children, folks who are helping us with our parents, police officers that are just coming out of the police academy, teachers, and a host of public sector and nonprofit sector workers. There are no age restrictions here. We hope to have folks of all ages live in this new community. And some of the multifamily buildings will have elevators and be fully accessible. So if you have a little age on you like I do, being in an apartment complex that has an elevator and has handicapped accessible units is fantastic. And then we're expecting lots of children and families to be there as well. And so we have townhomes or apartment complexes for them to choose. So we're excited about creating this offering for the Chester community.
Thank you, Greta. John, I think maybe this next question, John Bolton, our VP of Real Estate Development, is on today, and I think you'd be best to answer this. What is the construction timeline? When do you expect to break ground? When do you expect to finish the project?
Sure. We will apply for financing early next year, which will put closing probably in early 2020 or 2022 to start construction. And so we would be doing the first move-ins hopefully by mid 2023.
Great. Thank you, John. And we have one final question that we have time for, and I'll just put this out to the panel. What were the lessons learned? Well, maybe I'll put this out to the architect and Greta. What were the lessons learned during this process? Anything you want to share with maybe working with Chesterfield County or the community group? Or?
Well, one, we want to thank Chesterfield County and their leadership. They have been fantastic to work with. And in fact, they were the ones who pointed us in the direction of this property that had once been a terrific asset for the community and then had become a liability as a derelict property. And we were able to work with the previous owner and work out a transaction that was mutually beneficial so that we could get site control. So we want to thank them. We also want to thank the dialogue group and so many other partners who helped to inform us around the deep legacy that is associated with this property. It is sacred space, and we feel that. And Mr. Brooks, we just thank you for your parents' work that you have done and all that they did here, and we hope to honor that legacy in some meaningful way. And working with Burt and the whole Baskerville team has been fantastic. And every time that we've done a development together, it's an iterative design process because we come up with ideas and we work collaboratively together, and the project evolves and changes. And actually, by that partnership of working together, the project reveals itself. I would not have imagined the design that we are ending up with, but I love it. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I just enjoy Burt and the rest of his design team, along with our engineering team that work collaboratively with our property managers, our resident services people, and our resident and our real estate development team, working together to create a quality community that anyone would love to live in. And my litmus test for 30 years of doing this work has always been, would I want my mother to live in a place that I'm involved in? And I think she would be super excited to be living in this particular development. And I can't end the night without saying thank you to Carter. We're so happy that you're here. And I hope that you're as jazzed as I am about what's about to happen on this property over the next couple of years. And if you want to say something, take yourself off mute, Miss Carter, if you want to say something as our co-founder. Yeah, there we go.
I love you, Greta, and everybody else involved in this. And boy, this is really good and very inspiring. I'm excited. It looks wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for your care and attention to the important need in our community. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you to everyone tonight. Thank you, Jane, Elva, Burt. I'm glad you could join us for this celebration of our Builders Society membership. And Builders Society members, we couldn't do any of this without your continued support. So Thank you. We're grateful. We will be sending out the recording of this presentation shortly, so you can rewatch it and share it. And with that, we'll just say good night and thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Great to be a part of this.
Thank you all. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Dr.
Have a great
Brooks.
evening. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.